I would take the PowerPoint approach because, as has been said, we would like to use some numbers. And let me explain that the numbers we are using, unless we say so, are official numbers. They are the government's numbers by governments. And I mean the NDC, or His Excellency President Mahama, and in some instances Professor Mersey's numbers. Secondly, we start from 2013 for the simple reason that for many discussions, we have had 3 rebasings, we have had impact of oil and the rest. And so the current basis for the economy is 2013, which also happened to be a period which is very important for the NDC. And therefore, most of the analysis will start from 2013, which is important because we have also now had a full 4 years going into 2020. So it is significant that we are able to do some comparison and also resolve some issues which, has often been mentioned in relation to our performance. So let me begin with the first point. And I thought we would have a wider screen. But if you can, we want to state emphatically that there was little or no consolidation from 2016, as has been claimed. And let me explain. If you just focus on the yellow spots that we have, you will see that the year is 2016, and there was an expenditure level which is indicated, and then we do have a revenue level and an expenditure level. And you will see a figure standing on its own. It has no precedent, it has no antecedent. And as somebody who started my career within the PNDC era, I can assure you that you can go to the 1980s and you would never see that figure. This is very important for us because you would have heard over the last 8 years that we left a deficit of 10.3%, 9%, 8%. We just want to say that we did not leave that level of deficit. Let me emphasize, we did not leave that level of deficit. And I think it's important that our administration, our communicators, and others get this very clear. So what you have there is a figure of 5 billion standing on its own. And what was done is the 57 or so that is above it is what informed that 10%. But you can see that as we go down, this was actually used to reduce that 57%. And therefore, the balance that was carried forward was less than the expenditure that was indicated. And the reason for that 5 billion is, in fact, an exercise which we were doing as part of GIFMIS to determine the value of contracts that were outstanding, which we were going to put in the GIFMIS to enable us control the budget better. Now, so please bear with me. You will see that, therefore, these are nominal figures. You see that it's increased. Now, what we have here is percent of GDP, and then percentage of total revenue. And so you will see in this, in terms of GDP, that we have just translated, because it's easier to use, it's better to use the GDP, because one regime had oil, another regime, one oil field, two oil fields, all those things affect the GDP. You rebase, it affects the GDP. So when you use the GDP, then it becomes a very useful arbiter. So now, you will see the equivalent of the 2.3% the 5 billion, translating into 2.3% of GDP. And that is the extent to which our deficit was inflated. Do you get the point I'm making? I'm saying that it's an offset, and we'll show that it's an offset. And therefore, when you hear that we left a deficit of 8.3 or whatever, straight away it is reduced by 2.3. So if you have a deficit of, if it's a claim that we left a deficit of 8 point something, then it means it goes down to 5. Because I said it has no precedent, it has no antecedent. Now, if you again plot it, you will see a bulge here, and you see a small item here, right, which is that ratio. If you remove it, you see this becomes flatter, and you see that, in essence, the real deficit is going down. Okay, because it's reducing the expenditure. What we do here is, by way of comparison, in the absence of a homegrown policy as we had on IMF program, we have used the government's medium term. Because normally, if you want to resuscitate an economy, you would normally do it over 2 to 3 years. And so in the absence of any, program, homegrown or externally influenced, we are taking it that it is in the government's, medium-term, program, which is what we did with the homegrown. So we would also be mentioning the budget, for the 3 years, and then we would also highlight, now we have some performance to know whether that is achievable, because the economy went down in 2020, we are told. So we use the Q2 estimates and which was done in the media review and the actual to also indicate whether we will be going there. Because remember, we also have to look into the future. We also have to know what is happening, and we have to be measuring what is going on. Because as happened with policies like single spine and the rest, I think learning from it is important that we begin to analyze what is going on and also the forecasts that are made in future and whether they are believable, they are attainable, or not. So that is why we will be doing that exercise. So we translate that also. So you can see the yellow is telling you the performance from the media review, and it tells you that the targets are not being met. And therefore, the optimism that, unless, some measures are taken, the optimism that we will be reducing the deficit going into 2024, may not, happen. And especially if you take the revisions that the IMF and others, have been making, then you will see what we are talking about. Now we graph that also, so that tells you, that the issue we have now in Ghana is that revenue is not covering expenditures. Revenue is not total revenue, not tax revenue. It used to be total revenue. As we speak, total revenue, including grants, including our oil money, including the statutory funds and everything. When we say total revenue, we must understand it includes all this. It's unable to pay two items in the budget, compensation and interest payments. And what this means, practically speaking, is that we are borrowing to finish paying those items. We are borrowing to run government, all the ministries, what you call the goods and services or current expenditure. We are borrowing, for capital expenditure, which is what you would normally borrow. And above all, you are borrowing to pay arrears. And the above all now comes, you are borrowing to repay the previous loans that, you contracted. So this is how dire the situation is. And this is something which we have been indicating for a very long time and tracking. So as we go along, you will see that we would always use, this is why the revenue line is important. And so the revenue line is always shown as 100%, and anything above it represents borrowing. That's what it means. And then, so here you see, if you are making progress, as with single span and other passes, then this revenue line should be moving slightly up, right? But you can see that, the media review suggests that it is not moving. Okay, this is why pictorially is very important. And therefore, if you consider that we are talking about wages and you consider that there's agitation for, more wages and others, then it means that the situation is getting worse. If you consider that we have to borrow for all the things that are listed, then that means that the interest payment will also go up and it will take more revenue. And therefore, the deficit will keep widening, right? Again, unless some drastic measures are taken. This is what is, facing us. So again, the representation that the economy is rosy, better than what we left, and we'll see that's why we have the scorecard, will tell you that, yes, we had our single spine problems, we had our, problems, such as the shortage of, the disruption in gas supply actually from Nigeria, which led to doomsday, the coinage of the word and all that. But we will see whether those problems and the global financial crisis, the drop in crude oil prices, the tariff bearing, and all those problems put together, every economy has some crisis. Whether, we did well or worse as has been, portrayed. So, now, how was the 5 billion balance? Because the deficit we saw is a deficit which you call cash. That is cash coming in, cash coming out. So the odd thing is that a liability was appearing there. So to reduce it further, when you come to the arrears section of the budget, and bear with me here, if you add this for, two things are happening. You can see that almost everything here is red. And that is because you are bringing down a deficit and you are adding more. So you are increasing. It's in the red. So again, one of the things that has happened is that for the first time we had positives here. Again, it has no antecedent, it has no precedent. Right? But curiously, if you add the 4.29 to the 0.743, you will get exactly 5.03, the figure that we mentioned. And therefore, the positive was needed here to cancel what was being done, higher up. Now, the effect of this is that instead of the deficits, if you add arrears increasing, they begin to decline. So you see, you started with 18, 13, it's declining as you go down. Then you add another deficit, 1 point, it goes down to 14, then goes down further because of another positive 13, and you end up, with 10. Again, the percentages are there. So you remember we got 2.3. So if you add this 1.3 to this, you get to 2, you get a 2.3. This plus this. This is just another, offset, that was done. I won't bore you with the details. But you would have realized that the deficit that started with 8.5 has been going down to 6.1, and then going down to, it went outside to 6.8, ended with 6.1, and then 4.7. So it means the real deficit that was carried forward is either 6.1 or 4.7, depending on accounting. That is the record in 2016. It was not. And you remember that when the parliamentarians challenged His Excellency when he presented the State of Nation address, 6.3 was used in the subsequent budget speech, which means that it's acknowledged. Now, if there was a consolidation, which means a reduction in deficit, then let me submit that it is the NDC that achieved that consolidation in 2016 for the current administration. And I think this is a very important point we should never forget. Please, the communicators and everybody, we didn't leave a deficit. These numbers are from the 2017 budget. You can go to Appendix 3B, they are there. And you can validate it for yourself. Okay? The budget, 2017. And subsequently, it has never recurred again. Okay. So having settled this, and this is one of the important things about the scorecard, so that you can lay issues bare and then understand, what is going on. Let me also state that if you take the Fiscal Responsibility Act, which is 6.1, which is from our Public Financial Management Act, there has never been any year, because you have to take out the fact that they don't add bailout costs and the rest. When you add the bailout costs and the rest, there has never been any year since when the deficit has come close to 5% in our 6.1. That's even if you take it to be 6.1 and not 4.7. So that's a true record. It has not been achieved, and as we speak, the deficit is around 15%. Officially, it's indicated as, So again, the question is, a deficit of 6.1, even if we take 6.1, compared to a deficit of 11 or 15%, they continue the narrative that it did better than the NDC. Yes. Recently, it was said in Europe, in Germany, that we led a very terrible economy and all that. No. The facts are there in the numbers. And I think it's very important that, we do not accept that position. So we'll move on quickly. This is looking ahead, whether that record. And if you look ahead, you can see this is a deficit. If you go back all the way to 2013 and you keep coming, this is a deficit line. You see that the deficit declines steeply. And this is 2020. Between the presentation of the budget and the review of the budget. Now, this is the accumulation of the offsets, right, which gave the impression of the stabilizing situation, low arrears, and more importantly, the removal of the bailout costs. The removal of the bailout costs from the deficit. There are two reasons why it's not necessary. The bailout cost is fully, and we'll come to it, the bailout cost is fully provided for in ESLA. We'll show you the numbers. So we shouldn't take the blame. ESLA, the nuisance tax, covers the bailout costs adequately. And there was, if you go to the IMF Article 4 in 2019, there was a gap of 3 to 5% that existed already. I'm pointing these things out for us to understand that all the slippage that you see here, which has led to the deficit going, when the deficit goes up, it slides, cannot be attributed to COVID. So again, that is something which, is very important. That it was disclosed in Article 4, and it was disclosed actually in the report for the RCF or COVID loan. That deficit was there of 3 to 5%. And in fact, one of the bases for resolving that deficit was gold monetization. So that also is not a new phenomenon. It's not about financial markets, opportunities and all that. And the bonds and things were named as resolving it. So again, every economy has its crisis. We do acknowledge that COVID is the severest of the crisis, but before then there was a global financial crisis, and before then there was the disruption in gas supply domestic. Earlier we would have had droughts and other things. And as we show, the important thing is to prepare for crisis in the initiatives that we put forward, which resulted in $250 million US plus being taken out of the stabilization fund as a first resort to COVID. With 3 oil fields, if we had remained faithful to the stabilization fund, we would probably have withdrawn 400 to 500 million, US dollars. And that is how you win yourself of the IMF. You don't, which means that we would have borrowed less from the IMF for COVID. In any event, the borrowing, as we are saying, is not entirely, for COVID. So this is the trajectory going forward. And as you can see, there is a consolidation that is expected here. Please, it's always good professionals to look at, the numbers and to track them. If you track them, you'll see that the reason why you see with the deficit went down, then it's supposed to go down, then go up. It went down, this is the 2020, and then it's supposed to go up, taper, go down slightly, and by 2022 start, declining, right? But this decline in itself, as we can see, is because important factors like bailout costs and the rest were indicated as 0. If you add them, there's no decline, or no decline is anticipated. So if you ever think that, as essential with 2024, there will be a consolidation, plug in the bailout costs first before you get confident that, you'll be inheriting, an economy with consolidation. Because we will see the IMF has indicated that the bailout cost is going to, and we know it, that it's going to be a while before it tapers, so it cannot be 0. Those costs cannot be 0. And there are other costs also, like wages, interest payments, and the rest, and the borrowing, which we have already stated. So this is just an exercise. We can have sessions, for those who are inclined to the fiscal and to the macroeconomy, the technical team to go into it as part of our preparation. It's important that you prepare for what to expect, instead of just as has been in the past, you are slapped with, single spine, you are slapped with this, and it derails your beginning, your start, which you would have wished, for. Now, public debt. Again, let me just go quickly. These are the numbers. But again, we are said to have left a lot of arrears and debt. The question is, these are the official figures. Going into this should be 2013 is about 49. Okay, there's an error there. 47. Now, we are at 80. Ladies and gentlemen, you leave a figure of 47 less than 50. It is increased by 35. And the record is that the government, the incumbent, did better than you did. That's the narrative again. Right? But you could see that what we left, and again, sometimes they say we left 70% debt. That is based on the old basis. And even that will show that we were beginning to slow down the rate of borrowing. We'll just show it because of the sinking fund and things that we set up, which started to reverse. So I'm suggesting that even if you took 70% as where we left off, and you perform well, you should be reducing the 70%, not increasing it to 80 plus. So again, this is another narrative which we think we have to, educate our people. So we don't accept. Another narrative which we were discussing is said that we left a very bad, deficit of 2.8, slow down growth. That's 2.8 growth in 2016. But we had our crisis. Yes, we did have crisis. We also budgeted, for $99 per barrel, and we ended up with 35. It never recovered until 2017. We had one oil field. We passed on 3 oil fields. So we had our crisis. Yes, COVID may be severe. It led to, we are not denying that, right? So we left, but the point I'm making is that 70%, which is the old basis, old GDP basis. So again, know the numbers, right? Because we've been, pointing it out, and especially let me acknowledge our parliamentarians for bringing this up constantly. You will see that the old numbers are no longer being compared, apples and oranges, to, the rebase, basis, right? But occasionally it comes up. But I'm saying that even if you use our old basis, we left off better in 4 years than, the current administration at 80%. And the record is there to show. So, and this is the point I was making, that this is the debt. And you can see that if you go to HIPIC, you will see it rising. And then because of borrowing for single spine and others, it rose. But by the time we finished paying for single spine arrears and others, it started tapering. It started going down. It tapered and it started actually going down. So this is what I'm talking about. It was going up. The rate at which we were borrowing was going up because of those programs. But by 2014, when we started, you remember the smart borrowing, right? Through self-financing, through sinking funds, the initiatives. And this again to show that our policies worked. I think we should not be told that our policies did not work. The policies worked. And the evidence is there. This is the rate of borrowing which started to decline. And then, because those measures were stopped from 2017, you can see the rate of borrowing going up. Again, we are using official figures, right? And this graph has always been shown in the budgets up to 2019. It's no longer being shown. And it's in the debt management report. I'm not sure if it's in the 2021, but it's in the 2019 debt management report. So if anybody contests the fact that we reduce the rate of borrowing, recently you would have realized that, you would have read or heard, that the rate of borrowing has been going down better than even the Kwame Nkrumah era, better than even the period that you had HIPIC, when our debt was forgiven. Still the rate of borrowing was better. But this is a true official rate of borrowing. And we have it with the numbers. And so again, we should not accept that narrative. We brought down the rate of borrowing by any measure, that is taken. And this is the reason why we slow down the accumulation of debt. Okay. So these are the same thing. So trends are very important. At the beginning, it may be one time, so it doesn't show the trend. But now we have the trend, and I think that we can use this to empower, our communicators to show that, we performed, better. So these are all, let me just highlight this. What we have here is, I do not want to end on only a fiscal note, but you can see here, this is the rate of inflation. And the thing about the inflation rate is also like the GDP rebasing. The basket was changed in 2018, right? And therefore, it led to a tightening of the inflation. Of course, it's warranted. Why? Because the service sector and others have become larger. So you need to change the basket, which is the same reason this was used for the rebasing. But it is not a matter of prop. This is the reason for the drop, and this is why it is not shown immediately, in the basket of goods. That I had a similar experience giving an amount of money to my driver. I won't mention the amount. And he came back and he said, I asked him, okay, so can we make the trip? And he said, that amount used to fill the tank. He said it's 3/4. We want 3/4. Now, this is a rate of growth I've mentioned already. There's no way in which 2.8 performance with difficulties can be equated to 0.4% growth rate. And throughout the period that the economy slowed, for us, we did not bring the economy close to recession. We have had 2 consecutive quarters of recession. It was widely reported. Do we know how significant that is? I have seniors here as a PNDC boy. That was the first time since 1983 under the Structural Adjustment Program that Ghana came close to recession. And that is the result of the fundamentals or the basis that was laid in the successive structural adjustment programs. In fact, the last time Ghana experienced negative growth, which we came close to, was before 1983. And some of you economists who have seen, a graph which is popular, you see the oscillation from positive to negative, and then from 1983, it stops and it's all positive. Right. So I think both antecedents and currents. So we had difficulties, yes. But again, it's important to know that one of the reasons for the sharp increase is like 2011, oil, into 2012, when we did 14%. There's no acknowledgement. But TEN and Sankofa Field gave the significant growth in 2017 because crude oil prices and output, started to increase. Again, there's talk about interest rates. Please, let us note, these are official. You see that the interest rate, yes, was going up because we were borrowing to resolve all those headaches and problems. But by the time we started by the time we started the refinancing and we started the sinking fund and all, and we're borrowing less, you will see that the treasury bill rate started to decline. So it started declining, from around about 2014. Right? So it's not true that, we did not have a declining rate of interest. So you can see that some of the interest rates, I believe this is a 1-year bond and the rest, and you can see that while this has tapered, it has not gone down. It should have been in the 5% if we had followed that trend. By now, interest rates should have gone down to maybe 5 to 6%, right? And you can see that other interest rates have gone up in the interim, and so this is the monetary policy rate, which obviously we have some agreements under the IMF program and others, and therefore, even though we're achieving these results, especially debt and the rest, you recall that we were not, could not convince the fund that we need to, the Monetary Policy Committee. Of course, we respected it. But from 2017, it started going down because obviously the oil and other things had made, the situation much better. Okay, so we end on this, macroeconomic note because we are not going to be covering a lot more of the real sector and others, right? But you can see from the fiscal and everything that we did much better. Is ESNA a lost potential? We know the history of ESNA, so let me not, the banking sector was going down because of VRA, energy sector debt, road arrears and the rest, and that's what happened with a slowing economy. And because crude oil prices were falling, we decided to put the ESNA on the falling crude oil price because it will not have an impact. And by then, we had also started something called a strategic stock. Anyway, one of the credits for those policies, and I think it's very important, we should remember that around about June of 2015 was when we saw the last petrol queues in the country. And that's the result of the strategic stock policies that we're implementing. I think Honorable Saka and others were part of those meetings, right? And we're able to also stabilize the price through oil and, and others. But the point I'm making here is that ESLA was to last 3 to 5 years. And it's not true that we did not have a plan for resolving the banking sector crisis. Our plan was ESLA. And in fact, we did the first restructuring. We did the first restructuring of the debt belonging to VRA, owed to 11 to 13 banks. And we injected 250 of the initial ESLA money that came in, and then restructured 2.2 billion. Before we left, we handed over a term sheet for 600 million, which was to pay the IPP and other energy sector debt. So again, the fact that it wasn't done, and the revenue that was to go to the banks was turned into a loan, turning cash into a loan, it's mind-boggling, but that is what happened. I don't think we should take responsibility for it, right? The big bang was a choice, a policy choice, because we could also have done the big bang. But we decided, learning again from PNDC era, you remember, National Non-Performing Assets Recovery Trust, in part, a bad bank option was what we were, to ring fence, the non-performing loans, and then use ESLA to pay the banks, and then you do the recoveries and others over a period of time. And that is the experience of the U.S. and others after, two or so of those banks collapsed. So you see that throughout this COVID crisis, fewer countries, if any, collapse their banks. Of course, it can be closed voluntarily, right? So we are saying that it was a policy choice. But these are the numbers. This is what ESLA is bringing in, and this is what ESLA is supposed to bring in. And this is from the ESLA report. Again, official numbers, please. No speculation. So you can see ESLA was 2015. So you can see that the monies that came in of about 3.2, you see the energy debt recovery was what we used for the VRA and the policies that I was talking about. And because we anticipated these revenues, average of 3 billion, which has gone up to 4 billion, by 2020, bringing in 15 billion with elements of the energy sector, and then you can see road fund. Much of the financing for the roads and things that are taking place after the parking are coming from here, right? So this is the JM, only 1 year, because ESLA brought in that money, we started. We had anticipated that we were going to go in part style, but support it with these revenues. Because obviously, Nanatu is here, we don't have the donors to give us the money and all that. So we had to use, our own means to do it. Now, so you can see that from 2017, the current administration has benefited from the actual flows that has come in of about 15 billion in total, and it is projected to bring in 25 billion by 43 billion by 2024. That is the power of ESLA. Remember, ESLA, the nuisance tax, the rate was increased, if you remember, twice, right? Because the term sheets and others were not used to arrest the energy sector problems early enough. So it has festered, right? Ladies and gentlemen, the point I'm trying to make is that we had provided a wherewithal, for the cleaning of the energy and debt, energy and banking sector crisis in addition to the rules. And that is a policy that was derided. ESLA was to go away. So usually my punchlines don't come. So. Okay, so I'm saying that, yes, in fact, we did the asset quality review report. The asset quality review, which gave rise to the current banking sector crisis and others, was done by the NDC. And it is that which informed this. And yes, there were more officers, not denying that. But we have corporate entities which are different from the owners. That's one crucial point. And banks are systemic to the economy, right? So you look for, in fact, Europe now has a banking dissolution or resolution law, which is what we were going to implement, right? So that if a bank is going, it will be wound down, probably gradually. The owners, would have to, whatever assets will be sold, but a big bang was definitely not our option. Let me repeat, it's a policy option, right? We had an alternative, which would have kept most of the banks, if not all, standing. Because it takes a long time, in some cases 20, 30 years for those banks. And since the collapse of the banks, I'm not sure that we have been able to raise an indigenous bank to the level of 400 million capitalization. So this is a graph. Let me just focus on one. The whole of the yellow is the ESLA money that has come to the current administration. And the blue is what we came in, which we did not even fully utilize. So again, I don't think that we should accept this narrative that, we left the current administration to go and borrow to resolve, the banking sector crisis. What happened to 43 billion? Couldn't it be used to restructure, even if you had to pay in advance? Again, this is a narrative which I think we should not accept. I'm saying that I think the figure is USNS is 7%. And so you can say over 90% has gone to the current administration. And this is cash. This is cash which we pay when we go to fuel. Because ESLA. And it was supposed to have gone off in 5 years. So if you take 2015, as at 2020, ESLA would have gone. And we're confident that we would have gone in the current, situation that we are facing. By the way, ESLA won a prize. If you Google it, ESLA prize, and you will see, yes, ESLA won the EMEA, that is the Emerging Market Prize, in 2017 for the structure to resolve national debt. It won. You will see the picture. And you can send me, those who are in the picture. Right? No acknowledgement. But that doesn't matter. We just have to note that ESLA structuring and everything won the nation a prize in the financial markets. Petroleum. Again, the PRMA rules. Are they unraveling? There was deep thinking that went into the fashioning of the Petroleum Revenue Management Act. That's what PRMA. Because there were problems that the economy was facing for a long time. And as I said, as a PNDC boy, I used to sit, behind the tables with my senior and others, on some chairs taking notes, because I was also on the Structural Adjustment Program, secretariat. Then that was before VAT. So we are saying that all those problems we are talking about, commodity prices fall, and then the economy is in trouble because we don't have, and now oil revenue, let me add cocoa, gold, and then the economy is in problem. Debt was becoming a problem. We had declared HIPIC, and so we said never again. And the reason why the focus was on oil was that oil was a new resource to the budget, which you can use, to attend to, some of these, problems. So what was the structure? And what problems were envisaged to be resolved? One, GMPC is in the news. To empower GMPC, to be a true national oil company. So GMPC's budget is approved. And after it is approved, then the fiscal and economic, challenges receive some oil money. And the first one is what I mentioned, the stabilization fund. 21% of the GMPC. And this is what in advanced countries they call fiscal buffers. It's very simple. You increase the fund when the times are good, and then you reduce it when the times are bad. So it's like getting a bonus or a pay raise, and then you save part of it for school fees and others. That's when the times, and then when some calamity or other children go into hospital and the rest, and you spend. That is the principle behind it. And it worked. Because when we had a crisis in 2015, I recall that we were able to take 250 million, but it was Ghana cedis, compared to the 250 million US dollars. And so with 3 oil fields, can you imagine how much, as I said earlier on, we would have taken out if we had continued, to put money? Because we can say for sure that part of that 250 million, or a substantial part of it, was what we left in the stabilization fund. The cap has not been, restored or removed. And so more stabilization fund needs to go in. But this is rules-based. So for our parliamentarians, this is rules-based. Let us look at the rule. It talks about the deficit for continuous quarters. And if, the condition prevails, then you will withdraw from it. So as the economy recovers, we should not please. We would, look at the formula, and then we have to advise whether it's time to reverse and put money in. Now, once you cap it, you must use it for debt service and the contingency fund. So we use it to establish the contingency fund in the 1992 Constitution for the first time. And then for debt management, this is the source of the sinking fund, which was performing that magic. Right? Because the cap was it wasn't going to consumption, but it was going to reduce the debt. It's only when you reduce the debt and your interest rates start, going down, and the foreign yields are there to show, that you can borrow at a low cost, as many countries do, and you can borrow to do your projects, and the commercial projects will have to pay so that it doesn't, depend on the taxpayer. And that is the Ghana Infrastructure Investment Fund. Of course, we all know about the ABFA and the Heritage Fund. So let me just, move on. The main point here is that, please, these provisions are due for review, particularly the Heritage Fund, in 15 years, which is around about 2023 or so. So we need to be vigilant, so that it is not taken out for consumption. If you remember the debate whether we should, take out the stabilization fund, it's for a purpose. So again, similar to ESLA, we have this. These are the revenues that are flowed in. And this whole portion, the larger portion, this is the Professor Mills portion, 15%. This is the Mahama portion. And you can see half of it in the last 3 years alone has accumulated to the current administration on account of Sankofa and Tenfield. Yeah. Oh, Okay. I was waiting to the end, but we are almost, yeah, I think we are almost at the end. So, okay, so you will see again that this is one of the legacies that we left. If you take the last 11 years or 10 years, this is the 10th anniversary of oil, 2011 to 2021. And so the scorecard shows that, more revenue, oil revenue has flowed to the current administration from 3 oil fields than the 8 years of, Mills Mahama. So again, one cannot say this is a poor legacy to leave. So if you take this revenue from 10 field and Sankofa and you add it to ESLA and you add it to, by the way, sinking fund, I almost forgot. We use $550 million US dollars of the sinking fund, oil revenue, to pay off the first sovereign bond by His Excellency Kufuor. Remember, it was 2007 to 2017. And by 2014, we had reckoned that should we win the 2017 elections, we would have to look for money, to pay that. Let me get you the rationale. I hear sometimes comments that, we could have spent the money, and we kept it in the MPP. I think it was a good intention. Maybe if I may be defensive here. Because the question is, did you believe that you were going to win the 2017? And where were you going to get $750 million US dollars? Because no provision had been made to redeem, that bond. So Cabinet decided that we should set up the sinking fund, and we started buying off. So by the time we left in 2016, we had bought about $336 million US dollars of that from the secondary markets. Now, we had to make a disclosure when we were going for the 2016 bond, according to the rules. And so those who were holding the remaining amount of money, the bonds, decided not to put it on the market. Why? Because the interest rate was going down, right? And they preferred to end at 8.5 at maturity. So we're waiting for them. The maturity date was October 4th, I think. That's the anniversary of the bond. And I can assure you that we had about $250 million US dollars in the sinking fund, and the current administration used it to pay off the remaining $200 million on the bond, on that bond. So again, I don't think this is a terrible legacy, to have left. A successor, no. And I think it's important. In any event, we had a program, a plan. Again, in a technical session, we can show it. To use the sinking fund, we had refinanced the balance, 550, and then to pay it off, and to start paying down, and not wait for 10 years as we did, the new bonds that we were introducing, which were for 10 years. And with 10 Sankofa, we were sure this is the only way you can borrow effectively. This again was slowed down or stopped, and that is what is leading to the current, debt situation, because the funds, despite oil, additional oil, are not being used, for the purpose. So again, this is the same information, from the oil fields. Later on, you can have the benefit of it, which you can see the graph wherever you go, whether money going into ABFA, money going into whatever, you see that clearly. There was more money flowing, to the economy. Now, again, as I said, we also face a calamity. You see, this is the price of crude. And you see that we were able to do most of what we were doing because crude oil prices hit about $100 per barrel, which came to hurt us, when the prices dropped to about 33. As I said, we prepared a budget with 99. So you see that in terms of oil price, together with the tariff bearing, you remember the FPSO, Jubilee tariff bearing, and all that, we suffered the most decline in price. You can see around about 2015, right? And then it started going up till we left office in 2016, and this is the increase. So it's only COVID that has brought it down, but COVID has not brought it down with 3 oil fields to this level. Right? So again, in terms of achievement, I think that now we have the data, now we have the information, we're putting it together. I don't think we should accept, again, that narrative, or that, there was more pain, right? If you take oil revenue, you take ESLA, and let me say confidently that this administration also had the most support for a crisis in our history. IMF, 1 billion, Bank of Ghana, 1.7 billion, World Bank, African Development, and others put together, about 500 to 600, million, right, and counting. And then the 250 million stabilization fund. So if you take these resources and you take the flows that have come in for COVID, I can say that yes, COVID is painful, and COVID is something which is unprecedented in terms of the short, not the effect of the economy per se, but closure of the borders and the rest, right? But there was a lot of resources that have flowed. And this is why we must dig deeper. Was there a problem other than COVID? If we have all these resources. So we can see what we have presented, Your Excellency, Madam, that we did not look backwards to be stuck in the past. We look at the current. And we can say with some confidence that we had certain policies, we need to sharpen them, to have addressed some of the problems and crises that face us. But we also had a package. I won't go through all of them. You remember GIFMIS, you remember revenue modernization, you remember the tax laws, remember we set up a GRA, we merged IRS and the VAT service, where I used to be deputy commissioner, together to form the domestic tax division, and we were on course. We did single window, if you remember, which is digitalization, right? And then we were on course to do the domestic, attend to, so that we could strengthen. And in fact, from the beginning, despite all the difficulties that we had, our total revenue and tax revenue in 2015 remains unmatched, the levels, in terms of GDP. And so I want to thank you very much, for listening, and I'll hand over to the moderator. Thank you very much.